All right, guys, welcome to a video on introductions. So we're going to go through the pieces of an introduction, and then I'm going to show you an example and write an example for you. So let's get started. So I'm going to color code just like I did in the CBCW video as well. So we're going to start with a hook, and a hook is just grabbing the reader in, and we want no questions or what ifs, because we're stronger writers than that. That is a crutch that we do not need anymore in our writing. Okay? Now, there's not too many pieces to an introduction. You're also going to need a basic, some background information. And this might be a short, relevant summary. And in this background information, you're also going to want to include, and I'm just going to add it on this same page because they really do go together. You do need to include the author and the title of the work. Okay? That way, the reader knows what the heck you are talking about when they start reading. Now, the author and title of the work, that needs to be within your background information, probably starting it. It should not be on its own in its own sentence because it's not its own sentence, right? Elizabeth Bowen, the demon lover, that doesn't really connect, okay? And that takes us to the last thing that we really need, and that is your thesis. And this is the overall argument you are making. This is the thing that you're going to come back to in every paragraph. This is the thing that you are trying to prove. And this is the thing that also answers the prompt. For instance, the Bowen essay, which you guys are working on, is the who or what takes Mrs. Drover away at the end. Your thesis should answer that question. In what does Didion think that why Lucille Miller is convicted, it should answer that question of why does Russell want to feel so cold that the cold itself is permanently interesting. Your thesis is your answer, okay? And it should be the last sentence of your introduction so that your reader knows exactly where they're looking. All right, let's go ahead and grab an example. Now this again is an example from the Some Dreamers. Let me make sure you can see that. There we go. So we start with our hook. So dreamers of the golden dream are people who chase something that seemingly does not exist. That's a great hook because although it's not the most interesting thing you've ever read in your life, you're like, golden dreams, okay, seemingly do not exist. All right, I know a little bit about what this essay is going to be about. It's going to be about dreams. It's going to be about chasing those dreams. And I haven't mentioned the title of the book. I haven't mentioned who the characters are. All I know is that it's about dreams. That's a great hook. You can also use quotes from like outside sources, but the statement hook is perfectly fine. So whatever it is that you're talking about, you want to use that. So for instance, in Bowen, if you're writing about the trauma of war, your hook might be about that. If you're writing about something supernatural, you might write about that. So, like I said, the title and author should be in your background summary, probably in the beginning. So even though it's not in color-coded order of rainbow, it is there, so I'm going to mark it. So in Some Dreamers of the Golden Dream by Joan Didion. And then here we have our relevant summary. So this is a short summary, 2 to 3 sentences. It's not super long. And it covers what's relevant information. So if you are, for instance, writing about Mrs. Drover getting taken away by the soldier, and you will never mention the fact that it's wartime, you don't necessarily need to talk about that. So then we get to our thesis, which this thesis is kind of 2 sentences. 1 to 2 sentences is fine, but it is at the end here. And does it answer our question of who or what is she convicted of? Is convicted by the jury or why is she convicted? Is convicted by the jury because of her unsupporting characteristics. So we do have that. We also have Didion expressing her bias. That's talking about Didion's choices. So we do have a pretty solid example of an introduction here. Has all the parts it needs and nothing that it doesn't. So if I was going to write an introduction for Bowen, and I'm going to use the same thesis that I used in the CBECW paragraph, I'm going to go ahead and write my hook. Now my thesis is going to be something about the guilt of war. Throughout history, opinions on war and its worth have changed greatly. Okay, so we know it's going to be something about war. We know something it's going to be about their opinions. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce in The Demon Lover by Elizabeth Bowen. A girl who has lived through 2 world wars, shows the change in opinions. Okay, that's all we really need to know. A girl who's lived through 2 world wars shows a change in opinions of wars over time. I don't necessarily need to mention the letter. I don't necessarily need to mention any of those other pieces because they're not super relevant at this point. What it is a story about someone who's lived through world wars and they've changed over time. Through symbolism, the author shows how these changes result in Kathleen being taken away by her guilt. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and show you guys this as a whole. Got to undo it here. So we do have our hook, something about war and opinions changing. Then we introduce our stuff, a short summary, and through symbolism, the author shows how these changes in opinion, coming back to what we talked about in our hook, result in Kathleen being taken away by her guilt. Does that answer the question of who or what takes Mrs. Drover away? Yes, it does. And it would go very well with the paragraph we wrote in the CBECW video. So if we wanted to put those together, you can kind of see how that works. There should be an example of a paragraph or an introduction paragraph in your notes. If there's not, and you would like those notes, please come see me. Another thing is sometimes during our introductions and our conclusions, we tend to use more personal pronouns. So I'm going to remind you of the writing with academic tone, to not use those personal pronouns, no slang, abbreviations, etc. All right, have a great day.